Hello and welcome once again to a special Wednesday edition of the Blueprint, Canada's Conservative podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Schmale, Member of Parliament for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share this program. If you're on YouTube, hit the bell, be notified when new content is being made available. Today's show is going to be a barn burner. We have disarray within the Liberal Caucus. The Cabinet, members of the caucus themselves, want the Prime Minister out. And oh yeah, there was a fall economic statement. To talk about this and much, much more, we have Greg McLean, the Member of Parliament for Calgary Centre. Thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Jamie. Great to see you.
Always good to see you. I appreciate the opportunity. All right, this was a heck of a week. I got to tell you, Parliament is taking a break for Christmas. We'll be back in January. Justin Trudeau has his hands full. The only person keeping the Liberal caucus together is Jagmeet Singh, which is absolutely incredible. I don't know what the NDP are doing.
Nobody knows what the NDP are doing.
Yeah.
Did you see Peter Julian on TV the other night?
Oh, yes.
Quite frankly. Okay, after February, we'll get rid of this Prime Minister.
What happens in February, right?
Exactly.
Oh, someone's pension kicks in.
What occurs in February.
Exactly.
You know, it's blatant, you know, that he said that. Okay, in February, we'll rethink this. Well, why haven't you been thinking about this the whole way along? You admit this country is in disarray, economic turmoil, effectively governance that doesn't happen anymore, all dysfunction at the intergovernmental level, taxation system that's anybody's guess at this point in time. And of course, the fall economic statement, which was a turmoil,
And don't forget the housing minister resigned on the same day the finance minister resigned, which is a few hours before the fall economic statement. The industry minister was supposed to read the statement. He said, no way. Then one of the Randy Boissonnaults, the employment minister, former minister, was supposed to read it. He was next in line. That was a dumpster fire. Now, there was nobody else to read it. Karina Gould just basically threw it on the table and said, here you go. Yeah. And we have $62 billion in the hole for last year. We're projecting, 43.8, something like that for next year. I don't even think they are even focused on governing at this point.
I
call
agree.
An election.
I agree. I saw the polls earlier this week. 19% of Canadians are still going to vote Liberal. And I just go,
it's like friends and family here.
What do you need to see here to realize that this government has messed up almost everything they do here in Ottawa and running the country? There is nothing they're getting right. Absolutely nothing to get it right. I ask people, show me a program they're getting right. Yesterday, of course, you had Jonathan Wilkinson, the Minister of Natural Resources, back away from his promises on the clean energies, clean energy production across the provinces. He finally listened to the provinces. And you'll listen to his words. There are words from 2 years ago while he went down this path with a whole bunch of expert advice from his people in his department. This is ridiculous. Yep. Well, now we've lost the election, we'll back away from our fantasies. But economically, you're not going to talk about the fall economic statement here. Again, more fantasy on paper as far as what they're doing and what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and we have an incoming administration that is going to be sworn in the United States in just a few weeks. As I mentioned earlier, we're on a constituency break for Christmas. We come back in January, so that will have already occurred while Parliament's in recess. Meanwhile, let's cue up cut one. We have this happening within the Liberal Caucus. Play cut one.
But I can say we're not united. There's still a number of our members who feel we need a change in leadership. I'm one of those.
Today was supposed to be a presentation of a plan, and now we're talking about a finance minister who has resigned.
So he needs to go. Sorry, I'd like to hear you say.
I think he needs to go, yeah.
Justin Trudeau?
Yep.
Ms. Jessica, I'll ask the same question of you. Do you think the Prime Minister should resign?
Yes, I do.
Why?
I have been observing what has been transpiring both in Parliament and within Caucus over the last several months. A secret ballot in terms of the leadership of the Prime Minister was important to clear the air, to have people express their feelings about his leadership.
So Jagmeet Singh basically agrees with all this. He wants the Prime Minister to resign, but he will continue supporting the Liberal government until such time as they pick a new leader. So why doesn't he just take out a membership card in the Liberal Party and have his say in the leader? Because nobody else seems to have this kind of confidence.
I know. And when you look at this, you look at the polls across the country, even in Alberta, it's got the NDP still show up in the polls. And I don't know what the federal NDP have to show Canadians to say we're not worth anything here anymore. Yeah. We've completely capitulated again and again and again to a government that has led Canada down a rabbit hole as far as where we're going economically, world reputation, international fiascos. defense spending. We no longer show up on the world stage. We no longer show up for Canadians. And yet there's this pretense that they're still getting something done. This is a disaster.
Oh, absolutely. And I remember the big huff the media was in when Stephen Harper didn't get that seat on the UN Security Council. And then Justin Trudeau, in all his glory, and the media was pumping him up, he got less votes than Stephen Harper did for a Canada seat, right? That it was just a steamroll after that, right? But it's just incredible that there is such pain and hurt in our towns, in our cities, right across the country. Unemployment rates going up. Talk of a recession. Maybe we can put up the graphic here showing that the real GDP per capita was bigger in the second quarter of 2008 than in the third quarter of 2004. So, as you can read, that means more than 6 years in this country with basically no growth. We're not building anything. Nothing's happening.
Exactly right. And the issue, of course, is we brought in a whole bunch more people, and they think there's about 5 million people in Canada that are not Canadian citizens. Some are becoming Canadian citizens, but that's 5 million people that we've added to the population in Canada. And so as a result, our economy is still inching up a small rate. And the federal government likes to brag that, look, we got 1.7% growth. Okay, but we let in 5% more people kind of thing. So as Stephen Pelosi has said, that the per capita GDP has gone down steadily now for 8 of the last 9 quarters. This is a problem.
Yep.
Effectively, it means we're going deeper and deeper and deeper into recession. You just can't change, the denominator and expect the whole thing to lift itself up. The numbers matter at the end of the day. And this government doesn't get that. It is that whole thing about disguising their economic performance. Their economic performance has been miserable. They're financially illiterate. And I could say that, as you know, because I have some background in the area. But you take a look at what they've spent money on here. They've blown the doors open. You've seen our deficit numbers.
Let's put up the pie chart here. We'll show that.
No, I don't give the previous finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, any
She's not the hero.
Escape from this, because quite frankly, this is on her watch.
Yep.
And if you look at it, this is last year's number. We talked about last year's numbers going from 40 billion when she announced this year's budget. The 2023-24 budget deficit was supposed to be $40 billion. And suddenly a rewriting of that to be $62 billion.
Right.
And you're back-ending a whole bunch of expenses here that are effectively cooking the books at this point in time. They don't want to have to put that on the books going forward because it'll look worse and worse and worse. So the best thing to do is here's $22 billion we'll bury on the back balance sheets here. If you did that corporately, there'd be a whole bunch of regulators all over you. So part of the problem here is what this government is presenting to Canadians is absolute fiction. And Canadians need to, even presenting to the opposition. Here's some documents that we're putting numbers on paper, words on paper, and you and I have looked at those words on paper. They are completely cherry picking. They do not tell the economic picture of what's happening in Canada. They completely ignore the fact that we are going down an economic rabbit hole here that we're going to take years to recover from because of the policies of this government.
Absolutely. And so when we look at these numbers, so 61.9, 48.3 billion projected for this fiscal year, we've already passed the mark where we spend more on servicing the debt, so interest payments, than we do actually transferring to the provinces for healthcare. That's a staggering number I thought I would never see happen in my lifetime.
We were there once before, eh? So back in the Mulroney years. I
was really young back then.
Yeah, that's right. We had some difficulty at that point in time and recognized one of the reasons that the Chrétien government had to actually reverse some of the expenses, and that included the biggest expense on the federal government's balance sheet, which is transfer payments to provinces. What they effectively did at that point in time was take established program financing, which is primarily healthcare and post-secondary financing, take it from 50% funding by federal government down to 23%. So think of what happened to the balance sheets and the income statements of every province across this country. And we still have a handicapped healthcare system because of that decision back in the mid-90s. Now, do I blame Prime Minister Chrétien for having to deal with something where the IMF more or less came to him and said, your country's deficits are unsustainable? Okay? Our country's deficits are unsustainable again. This is the issue. People think running deficits is free money. It's not free money. You've got to pay it back at some point in time. In the meantime, you're paying a higher and higher and higher rate of interest. And that rate of interest, of course, comes out of everybody's pocket. $53 billion per year at this point in time. 40 million Canadians. That's like, $1,200 per Canadian, not per family, per Canadian, just to service the national debt. This is a problem.
Absolutely. And as we know, it's winter here in Canada. It's cold, and we do a lot of importing of food. So we're also seeing a discrepancy in the value of the Canadian dollar to the American dollar. And we import a lot of food from United States and elsewhere, but our dollar doesn't have that same purchasing power. That's going to cause, we've already seen record numbers at the food bank. That's going to cause the food insecurity issue to get even worse in the next few months.
That's right. So this government's running deficits, and they're bearing that with a Bank of Canada rate that continues to go down in Canada. And they celebrate that at this point in time. The Bank of Canada rate is, at this point in time, 1.75%. Pardon me, I think 1.75% between the one, might be 1.5 here very shortly because the Fed rate comes out today, I think you know, right?
Yeah.
And so the issue on that, of course, is we are now in that territory where we are at the very tip of the difference between the U.S. rate and our rate has hardly ever been this wide a differential. What that means is the Canadian dollar goes down. Yeah. So it's a design to get the Canadian dollar down to make sure that, of course, you know, things don't look as bad as they are for Canadians. Canadians are going to notice it at the grocery shelves. 20% of our economic activity in Canada comes from imports. Those imports are suddenly going to cost more. So yes, okay, our goods selling to the U.S. are going to be cheaper because of the dollar. We don't know what's going to happen with tariffs, so the dollar's going to be lower vis-a-vis the U.S. So it looks good. At the same time, it's going to cost consumers more. And that's the thing. You don't get something for free in this equation. There is always a cost.
That's right. And we're being asked, or not being told, I should say, by the U.S. and others to get our NATO spending up, right? So we're going to have to put billions into that. But we're already on the credit card. Like, the tank's almost empty. So when you're talking about the economy and getting it moving, the Liberals have handcuffed, and the NDP along with them have handcuffed the anchors of our economy, the oil and gas, our mining, our lumber industry, right? Mills are closing all over British Columbia. Hundreds of thousands are out of work. Villages and towns are decimated. And the Liberals just keep pushing forward with their policies. And the NDP, as we keep seeing, are blindly supporting them. I think they had an opportunity to come out and really set themselves apart from the Liberals, but clearly they have better minds in the NDP caucus that say, no, let's keep this ship afloat.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I think the NDP has a strategy here, and they're just trying to survive at this point in time. But you think about the war this government has waged upon the natural resources industry in Canada, primarily in the natural oil and gas industry, but you take a look at what they've done, the spillover effects to the other resource industries like mining. It's going to take 15 years to build a mine in Canada, which is a ridiculous amount of time, given all the hoops you have to jump through as far as the regulatory burden goes. Get that regulatory burden ironed out very quickly here, because it's longer here than it is anywhere else in the world because of the policies this government has put in place. Okay? This is something where also courts looking at it, you know, bureaucrats looking at it, different levels of bureaucrats looking at it, pace. In economic development, time is money. If you're going to sink money into the hole, and building a mine is literally sinking money into a hole, you're going to have to see some line of return, some line of sight on when you're actually going to get some money in the door after pumping money down a hole, if you will. And we say that because I used to be a flow-through manager, and we say literally looking for mines is still punching holes in moose pasture in Canada. Because, you know, whereas oil and gas is in a pool, generally speaking, and, you know, you can kind of find your way to it, mining is still stratified. You have no idea how the formation goes underground. Might be a slant, might be all kinds of different locations. You've got to know what it looks like underground. So we've hampered that all the way across this country. It is part of the rural economy. It's part of what makes this country grow. And the connection between the rural jobs and the urban economy has been lost at this point in time. So we need to make sure that people understand this is all part of our economy. It isn't just a service economy. We still produce. The jobs in the rural part of Canada pay a lot more than the jobs in urban Canada. And that's something that I think people have to get their eyeballs on here. As a result of paying more for those jobs, they pay a lot more taxes as well. And they're very good for our Indigenous communities, as you would know, Jamie.
Absolutely. So when we use the term economic vandalism, it's 100% true. You laid it out perfectly, right? This is like you said earlier, Chrystia Freeland is not the hero in all of this. She ran multi-billion-dollar deficits. She signed on to the program. She was along for the ride, and you know, It said all those nasty things during the pandemic, and the list goes on. She's trying to come out of this as the hero to secure potentially a leadership run in the future, right? To establish her brand, like, oh well, this isn't me. This is Justin all along, right? No,
exactly.
She was along for the ride. She was on board.
She's been finance minister of this country for 3 tumultuous years. 3 years when our economy has tanked in relation to our peers around the world. Now, the government will say, okay, well, compared to European countries, we're not as bad. Well, Europe's gone through their own energy transition here that they are backing away from very quickly right now because they realize it is a dead end. Canada tried following that path, and now we've recognized it's a dead end. We need to get back to actual economic development in the world that includes the democracies, that includes the advancements in sustainable energy that are brought about by our economies, not just by the developing world. We are very important in this mix. We bring great regulations, great environmental performance, and of course, great economics to the equation when we're allowed to prosper. Shoveling it off to the developing world is not a solution. And the whole government, Chrystia Freeland owns this for 3 years. And I think it's part of the, and everybody will say, I'm certain she's a nice person. And, if you meet her, she is a nice person. But you need to put a minister of finance in that actually understands finance. And it's very clear to me, having seen her perform, having seen her respond to questions in the House of Commons, that she knows very little about the portfolio she was supposed to be looking after. And that's, I think, a testament what we have to look for in this House of Commons from now on. I mean, is Dominic LeBlanc, does he have any background in finance? Probably a little bit more than the previous finance minister. But the fact is, we need people that actually understand what the Bank of Canada is doing. They understand what happens in the economy, the effects of everything you do, because nothing, as we said earlier, nothing is free.
Nothing's free.
Every move you make has an effect that you might not be positive for the economy.
Yeah, and when you look at the energy portfolio, it's you don't want to take a victory lap here, but we warned the left about this government subsidizing all these energy projects that didn't really have the rate of return in terms of the energy input into the system, right? We warned them of all that, and then we were shouted down by the media and all the activists. But yesterday's conspiracy theory is today's current events because, as you mentioned, most of these countries are starting to backtrack because for the amount of investment, the rate of return into the system is not meeting their energy needs. And we're seeing that all across Europe.
Yeah. We looked at, when I was in the investing world, we looked at investing in energy as a formula because you can manipulate dollars, what dollars worth. You can manipulate tax systems, figure capital cost allowance for certain industries. You can manipulate all kinds of subsidies. At the end of the day, take those variables out of the equation, we used to look at energy returned over energy invested. Yeah. And if you look at the energy returned over the energy invested in producing that energy, green hydrogen doesn't even show up. Green hydrogen is a myth. You have to consume so much energy to produce green hydrogen, you may as well not even start at this point in time. It's the same as fusion, and fusion is moving along, but it's still a whole bunch of energy consumption in order to produce a tiny little bit of energy. So we've got to get back to where the efficient energy is. That's oil and gas has become much better and is going to occupy a huge section of the power production around the world going forward. Nuclear should also grow. Nuclear's pathway to production, though, is very long because it has to be very safe. Yeah. So the regulatory regime around nuclear existed before the Impact Assessment Act. We need to make sure that we have very safe power delivery in our nuclear facilities in Canada, and we'll continue with that. And that's very important. But power is important. Look at Ontario. Their near-term solutions include new natural gas plants for a reason, because there is no sooner path to actually getting the power they need. And it's not just power for heating your homes. Absolutely. It's power for the industries that are going to come here. It's power for the internet. And you think about alternative energy, look at the power suck that happens with alternative energy. The entire internet is a huge energy consumption mechanism, and we know that digitalization is something that's going to continue apace here. The problem with the energy transition, as they call it, is that the transition is going to be very energy consumptive at the end of the day. That's right, yeah. So a whole bunch of energy expended to get towards solutions that'll mean we're more energy efficient on the things we do in the past. But that's part of the pathway we have to go through here and recognize, the cost and the benefit of all of these things.
Yeah, and cheap energy is one of the things that grows the economy.
Yeah.
We're pretty much out of time, Greg, as
That's
you know.
too bad.
Yeah, I know. I could have went on to that topic a lot longer. As you know, the guests have the last word, so the floor is yours.
Well, we've got a government here that, frankly, is at its tail end. And I think all Canadians see it now. Everybody in the House of Commons sees it. And I think this week's demonstration in the House of Commons very clearly showed Canadians that this is a government in complete disarray. At least some of the Liberal backbenchers now are actually speaking up about it. It's about time. But I think they're just looking at their electoral fortunes going forward. They've got to start considering the country. What's good for the country here? What's good for the country is a better government that actually looks at what's good for all Canadians, all the way across this country, respects jurisdictions, respects our Constitution, and respects the fact that we've got to participate in the world, both economically and as a foreign policy leader. And we're none of that right now. So this is what I think we're going to deliver. Hope we get that chance very soon.
I hope so, too. That would be a great Christmas gift. Greg McLean, Member of Parliament for Calgary Centre. Merry Christmas. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Merry Christmas to you.
And thank you for your time as well. I wish you a happy holidays, a Merry Christmas if you are celebrating. We will not have a Christmas Eve episode, but we will be coming back on December 31st, New Year's Eve, with a special year in review of 2024 with Tom Kimmich and Kelly McCauley. We'll be looking back at some of the major events that put 2024 into what it ended with, and hope you'll join us then. So again, no episode on Christmas Eve, but we will be back on New Year's Eve. Until then, thanks for joining us. And remember, low taxes, less government, more freedom. That's the blueprint.